The sound of boots crushing against the gravelly dirt road silenced the bustling main street of Nebraska City, Nebraska, as Alina Zimmerman clutched her water bucket with trembling hands. The year was 1876, and Alina had made the grave mistake of visiting the town well alone as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Now, 3 men with menacing grins and dust-covered dusters circled her like vultures eyeing a wounded animal. Well, what do we have here? The tallest outlaw sneered, his face weathered by years on the run and marked with a jagged scar that ran from his left eye to the corner of his mouth. A pretty little thing all alone at dusk. Alina backed up, her spine pressing against the cool stone of the well. She'd only been in Nebraska City for 3 weeks, having fled Chicago after her parents' death left her with nothing but debts and unwanted suitors. The boarding house where she'd found work and lodging was just 2 streets away, but it might as well have been in another territory. "Please," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have nothing of value." The second outlaw, a man with a ginger beard and yellowed teeth, chuckled. "Oh, I wouldn't say that, miss." His eyes roamed over her in a way that made her skin crawl beneath her modest blue dress. The third man, shorter but broader than the others, moved to block any path of escape she might have considered. "Gonna be real friendly like, ain't ya?" he growled. Alina's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd heard whispers about the Tanner gang when she first arrived, how they'd robbed the stage-coach 2 counties over, how they'd left a trail of terror across 3 states. But she never imagined they'd ride into a town this size in broad daylight, nor that she'd find herself cornered by them. "I said leave me be," she tried again, her voice rising with desperation as she glanced around the suddenly empty street. Where had everyone gone? A minute ago, there had been shopkeepers sweeping storefronts and ladies chatting by the general store. The scarred leader reached for her arm, his fingernails dirty and cracked. "You'll fetch a good price down," in the thunderous sound of hoofbeats cut through the air, followed by the distinct click of a rifle being cocked. All 4 heads turned toward the noise as a lone rider approached, silhouetted against the amber light of the setting sun. He rode a midnight black stallion that seemed to materialize from the dust itself, his face shadowed by the brim of a well-worn hat. The stranger pulled his horse to a stop just yards from the well, his rifle trained steadily on the tallest outlaw. "She's with me," he stated, his voice deep and unwavering, carrying the quiet authority of a man who rarely needed to raise it to be heard. The outlaw with the scar hesitated, his hand hovering over the pistol at his hip. "This ain't your concern, mister. I'm making it my concern." The stranger's horse sidestepped nervously, but his aim never wavered. "Now step away from the lady." Alina stared at her unexpected defender. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair visible beneath his hat. She had never seen him before, but in this moment, she was willing to play along with whatever story might save her from these men. The 3 outlaws exchanged glances, silently calculating the odds. 1 against 3 should have been in their favor, but something in the stranger's steady gaze made them reconsider. "You best remember this face," the scarred outlaw spat toward the rider before turning back to Alina. "And you, little miss, better keep better company." The cowboy remained motionless until all 3 men had mounted their horses and disappeared down the street in a cloud of dust. Only then did he lower his rifle and turn his attention to Alina. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, dismounting in one fluid motion. Alina shook her head, still gripping her empty water bucket like a shield. "No, I thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "Nothing good," he replied grimly. "Those are the Tanner brothers. They don't leave witnesses." As he stepped closer, Alina could finally see his face clearly. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with intense blue eyes that contrasted sharply with his sun-bronzed skin. A thin scar ran along his jawline, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his face. "I'm Hunter Thornton," he said, removing his hat briefly in greeting. "I was headed into town when I saw the commotion." "Eleanor Zimmerman," she replied, finally setting down her bucket. "I work at Mrs. Browning's boarding house. I just came for water before dinner service." Hunter nodded, glancing down the road where the Outlaws had disappeared. "Those men might circle back. I'll escort you to where you're staying." "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition, Miss Zimmerman," he said firmly. "I'd be a poor excuse for a man if I left you alone after what just happened." Eleanor couldn't argue with his logic, nor did she particularly want to. The thought of walking back alone, even the short distance to the boarding house, made her stomach clench with fear. "Very well, Mr. Thornton." "Thank you." Hunter filled her bucket at the well before securing it to his saddle. Then, to Eleanor's surprise, he offered his hand to help her mount his horse. "What about you?" she asked. "I'll walk alongside. It's not far, is it?" "No, just 2 streets over on Maple." As they made their way through town, Eleanor couldn't help but notice how people stopped to stare. A few shopkeepers who had disappeared during her confrontation now emerged, watching the pair with curious eyes. "You're not from Nebraska City," she observed, breaking the silence. Hunter shook his head. "Just passing through. I've been tracking those men for almost 3 weeks." Eleanor's grip on the saddle horn tightened. "You're a lawman," a shadow passed over his face. "Not exactly." He was quiet for a moment before adding, "Let's just say I have business with the Tanners." Before Eleanor could press further, they arrived at Mrs. Browning's boarding house, a 2-story clapboard structure with a wide front porch and neatly tended flower boxes. Hunter helped her dismount, then retrieved her water bucket. "Thank you again," Eleanor said, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after her ordeal. She smoothed her hands over her skirt and tucked a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "You should stay inside for the next few days, Miss Zimmerman," Hunter advised, his expression serious. "Those men don't give up easily when they've set their sights on something. Are you staying in town?" The question slipped out before Eleanor could consider how forward it sounded. If Hunter was surprised by her inquiry, he didn't show it. "For a while. I've got a room at the Dakota Hotel." The front door of the boarding house swung open and Mrs. Browning appeared, her plump face pinched with concern. "Eleanor, where have you been?" "Dinner needs serving," and she stopped abruptly when she noticed Hunter. "Mrs. Browning, this is Mr. Thornton," Eleanor quickly explained. "He helped me at the well when I had some trouble." The older woman's eyes narrowed with understanding. "The Tanners are back, aren't they?" "I heard whispers at the Mercantile this morning." She gave Hunter an appraising look. "You'd best come in for dinner, young man. It's the least we can offer for helping our Eleanor." Hunter hesitated, glancing down the street. "I should check in at the hotel and see to my horse." "Nonsense, Mrs. Browning insisted. "The stable boy can tend to your mount, and dinner won't wait. Besides," she added with a pointed look at Eleanor, "I suspect Miss Zimmerman would feel safer with you nearby this evening." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks but couldn't deny the truth in Mrs. Browning's words. Hunter relented with a nod. "Much obliged, madam." As they followed Mrs. Browning inside, Eleanor stole a glance at the mysterious cowboy. Who was he really, and what business did he have with the outlaws who had threatened her? Despite the lingering fear from her encounter at the well, she felt an unexpected flutter of curiosity, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name about the man who had claimed her as his own to save her life. Little did Eleanor know that this chance encounter would change the course of her life forever, drawing her into a world of danger, revenge, and a love that would burn hotter than the Nebraska summer sun. The boarding house dining room buzzed with conversation as Eleanor served plates of roast beef and potatoes. Mrs. Browning had seated Hunter at the main table alongside the other guests, but he remained quiet, his eyes occasionally finding Eleanor's across the room. She felt his gaze like a physical touch each time, sending an inexplicable warmth through her body. So, Mr. Thornton, Mr. Jenkins, a traveling salesman who had been staying at the boarding house for 2 weeks, leaned forward. What brings you to our little corner of Nebraska? Hunter took a sip of water before answering. Just passing through on business. What sort of business? Pressed Mrs. Davis, the widow who occupied the room next to Aliner's. The private kind, madam, Hunter replied politely but firmly. Mrs. Browning emerged from the kitchen with a fresh basket of rolls. Now, let the man eat in peace. He's had quite an eventful arrival from what I understand. Oh, Mrs. Davis perked up, hungry for gossip. Aliner tensed as she collected empty plates. She had hoped to avoid retelling the story, but it seemed inevitable in a town this size. The Tanner gang was hassling Miss Zimmerman at the well, Mrs. Browning explained, lowering her voice dramatically. Mr. Thornton here rode in and sent them packing. All eyes turned to Aliner, who nearly dropped the stack of dishes she was carrying. Is that true, Aliner? Mrs. Davis asked, her eyes wide. Aliner nodded reluctantly. Mr. Thornton was very brave. Reckless is more like it, muttered Mr. Peterson, the elderly banker who had lived in Nebraska City for over 40 years. Those Tanners have killed men for less than interrupting their fun. What were they doing back in town anyway? Jenkins wondered aloud. I thought the sheriff ran them out last autumn. Sheriff Morris is away in Lincoln this week, Peterson replied. They must have known. Hunter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at this information. How long will the sheriff be gone? At least another 5 days, Peterson said. His deputy's in charge, but that boy couldn't scare off a stray cat, let alone the Tanners. Mrs. Browning clicked her tongue disapprovingly. That's hardly fair, Mr. Peterson. Young Deputy Wilson is doing his best. His best won't be enough if those outlaws decide to cause real trouble, Peterson insisted. Aliner, still collecting dishes, paused behind Hunter's chair. Do you think they'll try something? She asked quietly. Hunter turned slightly to look up at her, his expression unreadable. Hard to say. But they won't leave the area, not right away. Why not? Men like that don't like being challenged, he replied. Especially not in front of a woman they were interested in. The way he hesitated on the word made Aliner's skin prickle with renewed fear. She hurried back to the kitchen, trying to push the memory of the outlaws' leering faces from her mind. When she returned to clear the dessert plates, she noticed Hunter had disappeared. Disappointment washed over her, surprisingly sharp. Your cowboy said to thank you for the meal, Mrs. Browning told her as Aliner began washing dishes. Said he had matters to attend to at the hotel. He's not my cowboy, Aliner protested, scrubbing a plate with unnecessary vigor. Mrs. Browning smiled knowingly. He also said he'd return tomorrow to escort you to church. Aliner's hands stilled in the soapy water. He did. Said it wouldn't be safe for you to walk alone, what with those outlaws still about. The older woman patted Aliner's shoulder. Very considerate of him, wouldn't you say? Aliner couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. Yes, very. Later that night, as she prepared for bed in her small room at the top of the boarding house, Aliner found herself drawn to the window that overlooked the main street. The Dakota Hotel was just visible in the distance, its windows glowing with lamplight. Was Hunter Thornton looking out at the same night sky? What had brought him to Nebraska City at precisely the moment she needed help? And why did her heart race at the thought of seeing him again tomorrow? Aliner sighed and turned away from the window. She had come to Nebraska to escape her troubled past in Chicago, not to get tangled up in new complications. After her father's death had revealed his gambling debts, and her fiancé, William, had promptly broken their engagement rather than marry a penniless orphan, Aliner had learned the hard way that depending on others, especially men, was a fool's gamble. Yet as she climbed into bed, She couldn't help but remember the steadiness in Hunter's blue eyes when he had said those 3 words that saved her. "She's with me." Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Alina rose early to help Mrs. Browning prepare breakfast for the boarders. As she kneaded dough for biscuits, she found herself glancing repeatedly at the clock. "He'll be here," Mrs. Browning said with a knowing smile. "A man who faces down 3 outlaws won't be scared off by a church service." Alina felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not worried about that. I just—" A knock at the back door interrupted her denial. Mrs. Browning wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to reveal Hunter standing on the step, cleanly shaven and dressed in what appeared to be his best clothes, a dark jacket over a crisp white shirt, with a simple string tie at his collar. "Good morning, ladies," he greeted them, hat in hand. "I hope I'm not too early." "Right on time," Mrs. Browning beamed. "Come in, come in. Alina's just finishing the biscuits and then she'll need to change." Hunter stepped inside, and Alina became acutely aware of her flour-covered apron and the loose strands of hair that had escaped her hasty morning bun. "I can wait," he said, his eyes lingering on Alina in a way that made her forget the flour on her cheek. "Nonsense," Mrs. Browning insisted. "Have some coffee while Alina gets ready." She shot Alina a pointed look. "Quickly, dear." Alina hurried upstairs to her room, where she changed into her Sunday dress of pale green cotton. It wasn't fancy, nothing like the silk gowns she'd worn in Chicago, but it was clean and well made. She pinned her chestnut hair into a more presentable arrangement, and added a touch of rose water to her wrists and neck, a small luxury she'd allowed herself to keep from her previous life. When she returned downstairs, she found Hunter engaged in conversation with Mrs. Browning, a cup of coffee in his hand. "There you are," Mrs. Browning said brightly. "Don't you look lovely?" Hunter stood, setting his cup aside. "You do indeed, Miss Zimmerman." Alina thanked him, noticing that he'd trimmed his stubble into a neat, short beard that somehow made his blue eyes even more striking. "Shall we?" He offered his arm, and Alina placed her hand lightly upon it. As they walked toward the church at the center of town, Alina was intensely aware of the curious glances from other churchgoers. Nebraska City was small enough that a newcomer was notable. A newcomer escorting one of the town's newest residents was cause for speculation. "Everyone's staring," she murmured, Hunter's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Let them. It might help keep the tanners away if they think you're spoken for." The implication sent a rush of heat to Alina's face. "Is that why you're doing this, creating a pretense?" He glanced down at her, his expression sobering. "No, Miss Zimmerman. I'm escorting you because I wouldn't forgive myself if something happened to you when I could have prevented it. And your business with the tanners." She pressed, lowering her voice as they approached the white clapboard church. "What exactly is that?" Hunter's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Alina thought he wouldn't answer. Then he guided her to a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree just outside the churchyard. "2 months ago, the tanners robbed a stagecoach near Fort Kearney," he said, his voice low and controlled. "My sister Hannah was a passenger. She tried to stop them from taking an elderly woman's wedding ring." He paused, his eyes focusing on something distant. "They shot her. Left her to die on the side of the road." Alina gasped softly, her hand involuntarily tightening on his arm. "I'm so sorry." "She was 19, Hunter continued, a muscle working in his cheek. "Just married 3 months. Her husband Thomas was waiting for her in Omaha." "And that's why you're tracking them," Alina whispered, understanding dawning. "For justice." Hunter's eyes met hers, and the cold determination she saw there sent a chill down her spine. "The law hasn't caught them in 2 years of trying. I'm not leaving it to chance." Before Alina could respond, the church bell began to ring, summoning worshippers inside. "We should go in," Hunter said, his tone shifting back to politeness, as if they'd been discussing nothing more serious than the weather. Throughout the service, Alina found it difficult to concentrate on Reverend Walsh's sermon. Her mind kept returning to Hunter's revelation. She understood the desire for vengeance all too well. How many times had she imagined confronting William after he'd abandoned her? Or the creditors who had stripped her family home bare within days of her father's funeral. But the Tanners were killers, not merely opportunistic businessmen or faithless fiancés. Pursuing them meant risking death. As the congregation rose for the final hymn, Alina stole a glance at Hunter's profile. His expression was solemn as he sang the familiar words about heavenly peace. What peace could he find while carrying such a burden? After the service, they joined the congregation outside, where families gathered to socialize before Sunday dinner. Hunter kept close to Alina's side, nodding politely to those who greeted them, but making no effort to engage in lengthy conversations. "Miss Zimmerman," a voice called, and Alina turned to see Deputy Wilson approaching. He was young, perhaps 23, with an earnest face and a badge that seemed too large for his slender chest. "And Mr. Thornton," Hunter supplied, shaking the deputy's offered hand. "Hunter Thornton." "I heard about what happened at the well yesterday," Wilson said, lowering his voice. "Mrs. Peterson told me this morning. Said you ran off the Tanner boys." Hunter nodded once. "They were bothering Miss Zimmerman." "That was brave, sir, but dangerous." The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "I've sent a telegram to Sheriff Morris, but he won't be back until Friday at the earliest." "And in the meantime?" Hunter asked, his tone neutral but his eyes hard. Wilson adjusted his hat nervously. "I've been patrolling, but I'm just one man. If you spot them again, I'll handle it," Hunter interrupted. The deputy frowned. "Sir, I can't allow civilians to take the law into their own hands." "With all due respect, deputy," Hunter replied, "you just admitted you're outmanned. I'm simply saying I'll defend Miss Zimmerman if those men come around again." Alina placed a gentle hand on Hunter's arm. "Mr. Thornton means no disrespect, Deputy Wilson. We appreciate your concern." The young lawman seemed mollified by her intervention. "Just be careful, both of you. The Tanners don't forget a face." He tipped his hat before moving on to speak with other townspeople. As they walked back toward the boarding house, Alina could feel the tension radiating from Hunter. "You shouldn't antagonize him," she said quietly. "He's just trying to do his job." "A job he's not equipped for," Hunter replied tersely. "Maybe not, but challenging his authority publicly won't help matters." Hunter glanced at her with surprise, then his expression softened slightly. "You're right. I apologize." When they reached the boarding house, Mrs. Browning was waiting on the porch. "Mr. Thornton, you'll join us for Sunday dinner, of course?" Hunter hesitated. "That's very kind, madam, but I won't take no for an answer," the landlady insisted. "Besides, Alina made apple pie for dessert, and I happen to know it's the best in 3 counties." Alina smiled at Mrs. Browning's exaggeration, but found herself hoping Hunter would accept. To her relief, he nodded. "Well, when you put it that way, how could I refuse?" Sunday dinner at Mrs. Browning's boarding house was always a more elaborate affair than weekday meals. The large oak dining table was covered with a white linen cloth and set with Mrs. Browning's good china. The food was plentiful. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans from Mrs. Browning's garden, freshly baked rolls, and Alina's apple pie waiting on the sideboard. The usual boarders were joined by Reverend Walsh and his wife, along with Dr. Miller and his daughter Sarah, a pretty blonde girl of 19, who immediately set her sights on Hunter. "Mr. Thornton," she said as they were seated, somehow managing to claim the chair beside him before Alina could approach. "Father says you're new to Nebraska City. Where do you hail from originally?" Hunter took a sip of water before answering. "Colorado Territory, most recently. Before that, Missouri." "How interesting," Sarah breathed, leaning closer. "We visited Denver last summer. Such a rugged, exciting place." Alina took her seat across the table, trying to ignore the stab of irrational annoyance she felt at Sarah's obvious flirtation. "And what brought you east?" Dr. Miller asked, passing a basket of rolls. "Family business," Hunter replied vaguely. Mrs. Browning, sensing his reluctance to elaborate, deftly changed the subject. "Reverend, wasn't that a beautiful sermon today? I particularly enjoyed your thoughts on forgiveness." As the conversation flowed around the table, Alina found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Hunter. Despite Sarah Miller's persistent attempts to engage him, his attention often drifted across the table to Alina. Once, their eyes met over the centerpiece of wildflowers, and the intensity of his gaze made her stomach flutter. When dessert was served, Hunter took a bite of Alina's apple pie and closed his eyes briefly in appreciation. "Mrs. Browning was right," he said, looking directly at Alina. "This is exceptional." "Thank you," she replied, absurdly pleased by his praise. "My mother taught me her recipe before she passed." "You must miss your family terribly," Sarah interjected, clearly trying to regain Hunter's attention. "Being all alone in a new town." "Nebraska City has been very welcoming," Alina replied diplomatically, though in truth, she had kept mostly to herself since arriving, focusing on her work at the boarding house. "Still, it must be difficult," Sarah pressed. "Especially with unsavory elements like those awful Tanner brothers about. Father says they're the worst sort of men." "They are indeed," Hunter agreed, his voice hardening. "Men who prey on the vulnerable deserve whatever fate finds them." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table until Reverend Walsh cleared his throat. "While I understand the sentiment, Mr. Thornton, we must remember that judgment belongs to the Lord alone." "With respect, Reverend," Hunter said carefully, "sometimes the Lord works through human hands." "Perhaps," Walsh conceded, "but vengeance rarely brings the peace we seek." The conversation shifted again, but Alina couldn't stop thinking about Hunter's words and the pain behind them. When dinner concluded, she helped Mrs. Browning clear the table while the guests moved to the parlor for coffee. "That Sarah Miller couldn't be more obvious if she tried," Mrs. Browning muttered as she handed Alina dishes to dry. "Practically throwing herself at your Mr. Thornton." "He's not my Mr. Thornton," Alina protested weakly. "Hum," Mrs. Browning hummed skeptically. "And I suppose that's why he barely took his eyes off you throughout dinner." Alina felt her cheeks warm. "He was just being polite." "Polite doesn't make a man look at a woman the way he looks at you, dear." Before Alina could formulate a response, the back door opened, and Hunter himself stepped into the kitchen. "Mrs. Browning, Miss Zimmerman," he greeted them. "I wanted to thank you both for dinner before I take my leave." "Leaving so soon?" Mrs. Browning asked. "We've just put coffee on." "I have some matters to attend to," he explained. "But I wondered if I might speak with Miss Zimmerman for a moment before I go." Mrs. Browning smiled knowingly. "Of course. Alina, why don't you show Mr. Thornton the garden? The roses are particularly lovely this time of year." Alina dried her hands on a towel and led Hunter through the back door into Mrs. Browning's small but well-tended garden. The evening air was warm, filled with the fragrance of roses and freshly cut grass. "Mrs. Browning exaggerates," Alina said, gesturing to the modest flower beds. "It's hardly a garden to boast about." "It's peaceful," Hunter observed. "Reminds me of my mother's garden back in Missouri." Alina sat on a small bench beneath an apple tree, and after a moment's hesitation, Hunter joined her. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for not revealing what I told you about Hannah to the others." "It wasn't my story to tell," Alina replied softly. Hunter nodded, his eyes on the distant horizon where the sun was beginning its descent. "I'll be gone for a few days," he said after a pause. Alina's heart sank. "You're leaving Nebraska City, not for good." "I received word that the Tanners were spotted at a camp about 20 miles west of here." His jaw tightened. "I need to confirm it's them." "Alone," Alina couldn't keep the concern from her voice. That's too dangerous. I've been tracking them for weeks, he assured her. I know how to keep my distance. And when you find them, she pressed. What then? Hunter was silent for a long moment. I don't know yet, he finally admitted, but I can't let them hurt anyone else the way they hurt Hannah. He turned to look at Alina, his expression softening. The way they would have hurt you. The intensity in his eyes made it difficult for Alina to breathe. When will you go? Dawn tomorrow. And if something happens to you? The thought made her stomach clench with fear, despite having known him for barely a day. Nothing will, he promised. But there is something I'd ask of you while I'm gone. What is it? Stay close to the boarding house. Don't go to the well alone or anywhere else by yourself. His voice grew urgent. Even if I confirm the Tanners have moved on, there could be others in their gang nearby. Alina nodded, touched by his concern. I promise. Hunter seemed relieved. Good, I'll return as soon as I can. As they rose to walk back to the house, Alina gathered her courage. Mr. Thornton Hunter, why did you help me yesterday? You could have ridden past. Most men would have. He stopped, turning to face her fully. When I saw you at that well, surrounded by those men, I saw Hannah. His voice roughened. I couldn't save her, but I could save you. The raw honesty in his words touched something deep within Alina. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. I'm sorry about your sister, and I'm grateful you were there for me. Hunter looked down at their joined hands, then slowly, deliberately, turned his palm to interlace his fingers with hers. The simple contact sent a shiver up Alina's arm. When I return, he said quietly, would you allow me to call on you properly, not just as a protector but as a friend? The word friend seemed inadequate for the connection Alina already felt forming between them, but she nodded. I'd like that very much. They stood there for a moment longer, hands linked, until the sound of voices from the house reminded them they weren't truly alone. I should go, Hunter said reluctantly, releasing her hand. Remember your promise. And you remember yours, Alina replied, to return safely. As she watched him walk away through the garden gate, Alina felt as though something significant had shifted in her world. She had come to Nebraska City seeking refuge and a quiet life, determined to rely on no one but herself after the betrayals she'd suffered in Chicago. Instead, she had found Hunter Thornton, a man driven by grief and vengeance, yet gentle enough to worry about her safety, to ask permission to call on her like a proper gentleman. A man who made her heart race and her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. Whatever happened next, Alina knew her life would never be the same. The first light of dawn was just breaking over the horizon when Alina woke to the sound of hoofbeats in the street below. She rushed to her window, just in time to see Hunter riding away from Nebraska City, his figure gradually becoming smaller until he disappeared from view entirely. 3 days passed with no word from Hunter. Alina kept her promise, staying close to the boarding house and allowing Mrs. Browning's stable boy to fetch water from the well. But with each passing hour, her worry grew. On the afternoon of the 4th day, Alina was beating rugs in the backyard when she heard the unmistakable sound of horses approaching. Her heart leaped, thinking Hunter had returned, but when she looked up, her blood ran cold. The 3 Tanner brothers sat atop their horses at the garden gate, the tallest one the scarred leader grinning maliciously. Well, he drawled, dismounting and approaching the fence. If it ain't the pretty little thing from the well. Been looking for you, darlin'. Alina dropped the rug beater and backed toward the house. Mrs. Browning, she called, her voice high with fear. Mrs. Browning, the outlaw's grin widened. No need for that. We just came to deliver a message. What message? Alina managed, her mouth dry. From your cowboy friend. The scarred man pulled something from his pocket and tossed it over the fence. It landed at Alina's feet, a bloodied piece of fabric that she recognized with horror as torn from Hunter's shirt. He won't be riding to your rescue anymore. The world seemed to tilt beneath Alina's feet. You're lying, she whispered. Wish I was, for his sake, the outlaw replied with mock sympathy. He put up quite a fight, found him snooping around our camp. Bad mistake. The back door of the boarding house flew open, and Mrs. Browning emerged with a shotgun in her hands. You get away from here, she shouted, raising the weapon. Deputy Wilson is on his way. The Tanners exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. We've delivered our message, the scarred one said, mounting his horse again. But don't you worry, little lady. We'll be back for you. Got unfinished business, you and us. With that, they rode off, leaving Alina staring at the bloodied fabric on the ground. Alina, come inside, Mrs. Browning urged, keeping the shotgun trained on the retreating outlaws. Now, Alina couldn't move. They said they killed him, she whispered. Hunter, they killed him. Mrs. Browning's face softened with sympathy. We don't know that for certain. Come inside, dear. We need to tell Deputy Wilson. Numbly, Alina allowed herself to be led into the house, still clutching the bloody scrap of Hunter's shirt. It couldn't be true. He had promised to return. He had asked to call on her. I'll send for the deputy, Mrs. Browning said, setting the shotgun aside. And Mr. Jenkins can go to the hotel, see if they've heard anything from Mr. Thornton. Alina nodded mechanically, but inside, a cold certainty was forming. Hunter had gone after dangerous men alone, driven by grief and a thirst for justice for his sister. Now he had met the same fate. Deputy Wilson arrived within minutes, his young face grave as Alina recounted what the Tanners had said. I need to organize a search party, he decided. If Mr. Thornton is injured out there, we might still be able to help him. And if he's not? Alina asked, her voice barely audible. The deputy couldn't meet her eyes. Then we'll bring him home for a proper burial. The words hit Alina like a physical blow. She had known Hunter for less than a week, yet the thought of him lying dead in some remote campsite was unbearable. She thought of his quiet strength, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at her, the way his hand had felt holding hers in Mrs. Browning's garden. I want to go with the search party, she said suddenly. Both Mrs. Browning and Deputy Wilson immediately protested. Absolutely not, Mrs. Browning declared. Those outlaws are still out there, and they've made it clear they have plans for you. But I need to know, Alina insisted, a desperation rising within her. I need to see for myself. I understand, Miss Zimmerman, but it's too dangerous, Deputy Wilson said firmly. I'll take 5 men with me at first light tomorrow. When we find Mr. Thornton, I'll bring you word immediately. Alina wanted to argue further, but the rational part of her mind knew they were right. She would only slow them down, put them in more danger. Still, the thought of waiting, not knowing if Hunter was alive or dead, was torturous. Promise me you'll look thoroughly, she pleaded with the deputy. He could be injured hiding. I give you my word, Wilson assured her, standing to leave. Lock your doors tonight, both of you. I'll post a man outside just to be safe. After the deputy left, Alina sat at the kitchen table, still clutching the bloodied fabric. Mrs. Browning placed a cup of tea in front of her, then sat down with a weary sigh. You care for him, the older woman observed. You're Mr. Thornton. Alina didn't bother denying it this time. I barely know him. Sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the mind catches up, Mrs. Browning said gently. My Harold and I knew after one dance at a harvest festival. Married 3 weeks later and had 35 good years before God called him home. Alina looked up, tears blurring her vision. What if Hunter is— Don't say it, Mrs. Browning interrupted. Not until we know for certain. Hope is a powerful thing, Alina. Don't surrender it too quickly. That night, Alina lay awake in her room, listening to every sound from the street below. Each creak of the boarding house settling, each rustle of wind in the trees outside her window, made her start with both hope and dread. Was it Hunter returning against all odds? Or the Tanners coming back to make good on their threat? Somewhere near dawn, exhaustion finally claimed her, pulling her into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of Hunter calling her name from somewhere she couldn't reach. She woke to Mrs. Browning shaking her shoulder gently. "Eleanor, wake up. Deputy Wilson is back." Eleanor sat bolt upright, her heart pounding. "Did they find him?" Mrs. Browning's expression was unreadable. "Come downstairs." Eleanor threw on a robe over her nightgown and hurried down to the parlor, where Deputy Wilson stood just inside the door. His clothes were dusty, his face drawn with fatigue. "You find him?" Eleanor repeated, her voice breaking. Wilson shook his head. "We found the Tanners' camp about 15 miles west of town. There was evidence of a struggle, blood on the ground, bullet holes in a tree, but no body." "No body," Eleanor echoed, the words not quite registering. "So he could be alive, it's possible," Wilson said cautiously. "But Miss Zimmerman, there was a lot of blood, and we found this." He held out a folded piece of paper. It was pinned to a tree with a knife. Eleanor took the paper with trembling hands and unfolded it. Inside, in a crude scrawl, was written, "The cowboy paid for interfering. The girl is next." "They're threatening you directly now," Wilson said gravely. "You need to be extremely careful." "But you don't know for certain that Hunter is dead," Eleanor insisted, clinging to that single thread of hope. "No, we don't," the deputy admitted. "And we'll keep searching. But Miss Zimmerman, you should prepare yourself for the worst." After Wilson left, promising to post men around the boarding house and to continue searching for Hunter, Eleanor sat motionless in the parlor. Mrs. Browning brought her breakfast, but she couldn't eat. "I have to do something," she said finally. "I can't just sit here waiting." "There's nothing you can do that the deputy and his men aren't already doing," Mrs. Browning reasoned. "The best thing for you is to stay safe, just as Mr. Thornton wanted." Eleanor knew she was right, but the enforced inactivity was maddening. By midday, she had taken to pacing the boarding house, checking the street from various windows, jumping at every sound. When a knock came at the front door late that afternoon, Eleanor raced to answer it before Mrs. Browning could intervene. It wasn't Hunter, but Dr. Miller with his daughter Sarah in tow. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her, his expression solemn. "We heard about what happened. Sarah insisted we come check on you." "That's very kind," Eleanor replied automatically, trying to mask her disappointment. "Please come in." They settled in the parlor, where Sarah immediately launched into concerned questions. "Is it true the Tanners threatened you specifically? And poor Mr. Thornton, do they really think he's been killed?" "Sarah," her father admonished, "show some sensitivity." The young woman had the grace to look abashed. "I'm sorry, it's all so awful, and Mr. Thornton seemed like such a fine man." "He is a fine man," Eleanor corrected, unable to accept the past tense. "We don't know what happened to him yet." Dr. Miller nodded sympathetically. "Of course. There's always hope until proven otherwise. But Miss Zimmerman, I came to offer you something more practical than hope." "What do you mean?" "My sister lives in Omaha," he explained. "Sarah and I were planning to visit her next week, but under the circumstances, I think we should leave immediately." "You would be welcome to join us." Eleanor stared at him. "Leave Nebraska City, just until this situation resolves itself," the doctor clarified. "The Tanners have made their intentions clear. You would be safer in Omaha, at least temporarily." The offer was sensible, even generous. Omaha was a larger city, far from the Tanners' usual territory. She would be safe there, but leaving meant giving up on Hunter. "I appreciate your concern, Dr. Miller," she said slowly, "but I can't leave. Not yet." "Because of Mr. Thornton?" Sarah asked, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. Eleanor nodded. "I need to know what happened to him." Dr. Miller sighed. "I understand loyalty, Miss Zimmerman, but Mr. Thornton would surely want you to be safe above all else." "He would," Eleanor agreed, "but I can't abandon him when there's still a chance he's alive." After the Millers left, with a promise that the offer remained open should Eleanor change her mind, Mrs. Browning found her standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the gathering dusk. Dr. Miller is right, you know, the landlady said softly. You'd be safer in Omaha. I know, Alina admitted. But I can't explain it, Mrs. Browning. Something inside me says Hunter is still alive, and if there's even the slightest chance, I have to stay. Mrs. Browning studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we'll face whatever comes together. But promise me you won't do anything foolish. I promise, Alina said, though even as the words left her mouth, an idea was forming in her mind. An idea that Mrs. Browning would certainly consider foolish, perhaps even dangerous. But if Hunter was alive and injured somewhere beyond the reach of Deputy Wilson's search party, Alina couldn't simply wait and hope. She needed to act. The next morning, Alina rose before dawn. She dressed in her simplest skirt and blouse, pulling a shawl around her shoulders despite the summer warmth. In a small bag, she packed bread, cheese, a water flask, and the small knife she used for peeling vegetables in the kitchen. Mrs. Browning was still asleep as Alina crept down the back stairs and out through the garden. The Deputy Wilson had posted outside the boarding house was dozing in a chair on the front porch, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Alina's heart pounded as she slipped through the garden gate and made her way to the livery stable at the edge of town. Mr. Hayes, the stable master, was already up, tending to the horses. Miss Zimmerman, he greeted her with surprise. You're about early. I need to rent a horse, Mr. Hayes, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The stable master frowned. Deputy Wilson said you weren't to leave town, said it wasn't safe. It's important, Alina insisted. Please, I wouldn't ask if it weren't absolutely necessary. Hayes studied her face, then sighed. You're going looking for that Thornton fella, ain't you? Alina didn't deny it. The search party didn't go far enough. He could be out there, injured, unable to make it back to town. Or he could be exactly where the Tanners want you to be, alone and unprotected, Hayes countered. Those men are dangerous, Miss Zimmerman. They've killed before and won't hesitate to do so again. I understand the risk, Alina said quietly, but I have to try. Wouldn't you do the same for someone you cared about? The question gave the stable master pause. After a long moment, he nodded reluctantly. Let me at least give you my gentlest mare, and a pistol. A pistol, Alina repeated, alarmed. I don't know how to use one. It's simple enough, Hayes said, leading a dappled gray mare from her stall. Point and pull the trigger. With any luck, you won't need it, but I'll feel better knowing you have it. As Hayes saddled the mare and showed Alina how to handle the small revolver, the eastern sky began to lighten. Soon the town would be awake, and her absence noticed. The Tanners' camp was west of town, Hayes told her, helping her mount. About 15 miles, according to what I heard. Follow the creek that runs behind the church. It'll lead you to where the deputy found their camp. Alina tucked the revolver into her bag with shaking hands. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. The stable master's weathered face creased with concern. Be careful, Miss Zimmerman, and if you find any sign of trouble, you turn right around and come back. Promise me. I promise, she said, though they both knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. As Alina rode out of Nebraska City, the sun was just cresting the horizon, casting long shadows across the rolling prairie. She had never ventured this far from town alone, and the vastness of the landscape was both beautiful and intimidating. She followed the creek as Hayes had instructed, keeping her eyes fixed on the western horizon. 15 miles seemed an impossible distance on horseback, but Alina was determined. Every hoofbeat carried her further from safety and potentially closer to Hunter. The morning grew warm as the sun climbed higher. Alina stopped once to rest the mare and drink from her water flask, scanning the landscape for any sign of movement. The prairie seemed empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By midday, the creek had narrowed, winding through increasingly rugged terrain. Stands of cottonwood trees provided occasional shade, and in the distance, low hills broke the flatness of the prairie. It was near one such stand of trees that Alina first noticed something unusual: a flock of circling birds, their dark shapes wheeling against the blue sky. Scavengers, her mind supplied with a chill. Urging the mare forward, Alina approached cautiously. As she drew closer, she could see signs of recent human presence: a fire pit with cold ashes, discarded food tins, trampled grass where horses had been tethered. This must be the abandoned camp Deputy Wilson had found. Alina dismounted, tying the mare to a tree branch. Her heart pounded as she surveyed the site. There was dried blood on the ground near the fire pit, just as Wilson had described. A tree at the edge of the clearing bore bullet holes in its trunk. "Hunter," she called tentatively, her voice sounding small in the vastness. "Hunter, are you here?" Only silence answered her. Alina moved methodically through the camp, searching for any clue to what had happened, or where Hunter might have gone if he had been able to leave under his own power. She found empty whiskey bottles, more bullet casings, and then, partially hidden beneath a fallen branch, a man's hat, Hunter's hat. Alina picked it up with trembling hands. The brim was stained with dried blood, and there was a bullet hole through the crown. Her stomach lurched at the implication. "No," she whispered. "No, please." A twig snapped behind her, and Alina whirled around, clutching the hat to her chest. At the edge of the clearing stood a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, leaning heavily against a tree. "Alina." The figure croaked, his voice rough with disbelief. Alina's heart stopped, then raced. "Hunter." He took an unsteady step forward, and Alina could finally see him clearly. His face was bruised, a gash across his forehead crusted with dried blood. His shirt was torn and bloodied, one arm held protectively against his side. But he was alive. With a cry, Alina ran to him, reaching him just as his strength seemed to give out. He sagged against her, his weight nearly bringing them both to the ground. "You're alive," she breathed, helping him to sit against the tree. "The tanners said they'd killed you. They showed me your shirt with blood." "Almost did," Hunter managed, his breathing labored. "Shot me, left me for dead, been trying to make it back to town." Alina quickly retrieved her water flask, helping him drink. "You're hurt badly. We need to get you to Dr. Miller." Hunter shook his head weakly. "Tanners might still be around. Too dangerous for you." "I'm not leaving you here," Alina said firmly, fear giving way to determination. "Can you ride?" "Not sure." He attempted to straighten and winced in pain. "Bullet grazed my side. Lost a lot of blood, but I think it missed anything vital." Alina helped him remove his tattered shirt to examine the wound. A deep furrow ran along his right side, the flesh angry and red but no longer actively bleeding. She used her water to clean it as best she could, then tore strips from her petticoat to bind it. "What were you thinking, coming out here alone?" Hunter asked as she worked, his blue eyes clouded with pain but fixed intently on her face. "I was thinking I couldn't bear it if you died alone out here," Alina replied honestly. "Not when I just found you." Something flickered in Hunter's expression: surprise, followed by a warmth that had nothing to do with fever. "You shouldn't have risked yourself for me." "You risked yourself for me at the well," she countered. "And again by going after the tanners. That's different." "Why?" "Because you're a man and I'm a woman." Despite his pain, Hunter's mouth curved into a slight smile. "Because I've been hunting men like the tanners for years. I knew the risks." "So did I," Alina said simply, finishing the bandage. "Now, we need to get you on that horse and back to town before dark." With considerable effort and not a few pained groans from Hunter, Alina managed to help him onto the mare's back. She climbed up behind him, one arm wrapped around his waist to keep him steady, the other holding the reins. "We'll take it slow," she assured him, urging the mare into a walk. "Just lean back against me if you need to." As they made their way back toward Nebraska City, Hunter drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words Alina couldn't quite catch. She kept him talking as much as possible, afraid that if he fell completely silent, she might lose him. "Tell me about Hannah," she prompted when his head began to loll forward. "What was she like?" Hunter stirred, straightening slightly. "Stubborn," he said, his voice faint but clear. "Like you." "Brave, too brave for her own good." "Is that why she tried to stop the Tanners from taking that woman's ring?" "Yes, always fighting for others." Hunter's voice strengthened as he spoke of his sister. "She was the best of us, made me promise to look after Thomas if anything happened to her. Seems she knew the risk she was taking even then." "And did you look after Thomas?" Hunter was quiet for a moment. "I tried. But after Hannah died, he changed, became reckless, bent on revenge. Last I heard, he was tracking the Tanners himself further north." Alina tightened her grip around Hunter's waist as the mare navigated a rocky patch of ground. "Is that why you're really after them?" "For Thomas, partly," Hunter admitted, "but mostly for Hannah. And for all the others they've hurt. Someone has to stop them." "The law has failed," Hunter finished for her. "The Tanners have been raiding and killing across 3 territories for years. Marshal's office has warrants, but they always slip away." Alina couldn't argue with his logic, but the thought of Hunter continuing his dangerous pursuit made her heart constrict with fear. "And now, will you still go after them once you're healed?" Hunter was silent for so long that Alina thought he might have lost consciousness again. Finally, he said, "I don't know. When I rode out of town 4 days ago, I was certain of my path. Now—" He didn't finish the thought, but Alina felt his hand cover hers where it rested against his abdomen. The sun was low in the sky by the time the outskirts of Nebraska City came into view. Alina felt Hunter sag with relief against her. "Made it," he murmured. "Yes," she agreed, fighting back tears of exhaustion and gratitude. "We made it." They were spotted by a farmhand as they approached town, who ran ahead to alert Deputy Wilson. By the time Alina guided the tired mare onto the main street, a small crowd had gathered, including the deputy, Dr. Miller, and Mrs. Browning, whose expression flickered from relief to dismay to anger when she saw Alina. "Thank God," the landlady exclaimed as Dr. Miller hurried forward to help Hunter dismount. "We've been beside ourselves with worry." Deputy Wilson helped Alina down from the horse, his young face stern. "Miss Zimmerman, what you did was incredibly dangerous and directly against my instructions." "Yes, it was," Alina agreed, too exhausted to argue. "And I'd do it again." Hunter was dying out there. The deputy's expression softened slightly. "You're fortunate you didn't encounter the Tanners. They were spotted near the creek this morning by one of my search parties." Alina's blood ran cold at how close she might have come to the Outlaws. "Are they still searching for them?" "Yes, with reinforcements from Lincoln," Wilson confirmed. "Sheriff Morris returned early when he heard what happened. They're determined to bring the Tanners in this time." While they were speaking, Dr. Miller had examined Hunter's wound and directed several men to carry him to the doctor's office down the street. "Miss Zimmerman," the doctor called, "Mr. Thornton is asking for you." Alina hurried to follow, but Mrs. Browning caught her arm. "You and I will be having words about this later, young lady," the older woman warned, though there was more worry than anger in her tone. "I know," Alina conceded. "And I'm sorry for frightening you, but I couldn't sit by and do nothing." Mrs. Browning's expression softened. "Go on, then." "Your cowboy needs you." In Dr. Miller's tidy office, Hunter had been laid on an examination table, his torn and bloodied shirt removed completely. The doctor was cleaning the wound properly, preparing to stitch it closed. "This will hurt," Dr. Miller warned him. "I can give you laudanum for the pain." Hunter shook his head. "Just get it done." Alina moved to his side, taking his hand in hers. "I'm here," she said softly. Hunter's fingers tightened around hers as the doctor began stitching. His jaw clenched with pain, but he made no sound. "You're fortunate," Dr. Miller commented as he worked. "The bullet grazed you deeply but didn't penetrate. Another inch to the left and we'd be having a very different conversation. Wasn't luck, Hunter managed through gritted teeth. Was wearing my father's pocket watch. Bullet hit it first. Then your father saved your life, the doctor said, tying off the last stitch. The wound is clean now, but you'll need to rest completely for at least a week to avoid reopening it. And you're weak from blood loss. He can stay at the boarding house, Alina said quickly. We have an empty room on the ground floor. Dr. Miller raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on her eagerness. That would be suitable, provided he's not moved until tomorrow. I'd like to keep him here tonight for observation. I'll stay with him, Alina offered immediately. Alina, Hunter protested weakly. You need rest too. I'll rest better knowing you're not alone, she countered. Dr. Miller cleared his throat. While I appreciate your dedication, Miss Zimmerman, it wouldn't be proper for you to remain unchaperoned overnight. Before Alina could protest, the door opened and Mrs. Browning entered, carrying a basket. I brought clean clothes for Mr. Thornton and some soup, she announced. Seeing the tableau before her, she added, and I'll be staying as well, so you needn't worry about propriety, Doctor. The doctor looked between the determined faces of the two women and wisely conceded. Very well. I'll be in the next room if he worsens during the night. After Dr. Miller departed, Mrs. Browning helped Alina settle Hunter more comfortably on the examination table, now converted to a makeshift bed with clean sheets and blankets. You should eat something, Alina urged, offering Hunter a spoonful of the beef broth Mrs. Browning had brought. Though clearly exhausted, Hunter accepted her ministrations, his eyes never leaving her face. You saved my life today, he said when Mrs. Browning stepped out briefly to speak with Dr. Miller. Alina shook her head. You would have made it back eventually. No, he insisted, catching her wrist gently. I was getting weaker each hour. Another night out there and... He didn't need to finish the thought. Why did you do it, Alina? Risk yourself that way. Alina could have offered many reasons: compassion, duty, basic human decency. But looking into Hunter's blue eyes, shadowed with pain yet intense with something that made her heart race, she could only offer the truth. Because in the short time I've known you, you've become important to me, she said softly. More important than I thought possible. Hunter's expression softened, his thumb tracing circles on the inside of her wrist. When I was out there, drifting in and out of consciousness, thinking I might die, he said hoarsely, it wasn't Hannah or Thomas or even the Tanners I thought about. It was you, your smile. The way you looked in that green dress on Sunday. Alina felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away. Hunter, I know it's too soon, he continued, his voice gaining strength. We barely know each other, but I feel like I've been looking for you my whole life without realizing it. The door opened before Alina could respond, Mrs. Browning returning with fresh water. But the look that passed between her and Hunter held promises that didn't need immediate words. The night passed slowly, with Alina dozing in a chair beside Hunter's bed while Mrs. Browning kept watch from across the room. By morning, Hunter's fever had broken, and Dr. Miller pronounced him stable enough to be moved to the boarding house. But absolute rest for at least a week, the doctor insisted. That means no riding, no strenuous activity of any kind. I'll make sure of it, Alina promised. With the help of Deputy Wilson and another man, Hunter was carefully transported to the boarding house and settled in the small ground floor room that had once belonged to Mrs. Browning's husband. As news spread through Nebraska City that Hunter Thornton had survived and been rescued by Alina Zimmerman, visitors began appearing at the boarding house. Some brought food, others simply came to hear the story firsthand. Alina found herself thrust into the role of both nurse and storyteller, recounting her journey while tending to Hunter's needs. She didn't mind. Each retelling strengthened her own belief in what had happened, making it seem less like a dream and more like the pivotal moment she knew it was. By the third day of Hunter's convalescence, the steady stream of visitors had dwindled, allowing for quieter moments between them. Alina would read to him from Mrs. Browning's small collection of books, or they would simply talk, sharing stories of their lives before Nebraska City. Hunter told her about growing up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith who had taught him to work with metal and wood. About his years drifting westward after his father's death, working as a ranch hand and occasionally as a scout for the army. About Hannah, who had married young and followed her husband to Omaha, where he worked for the railroad. In turn, Alina shared her own story, her comfortable childhood in Chicago as the daughter of a successful merchant, the devastating loss of both parents within months of each other, and the discovery that her father had gambled away their fortune. "My fiancé broke our engagement the day after my father's funeral," she told Hunter as they sat in the boarding house garden one warm afternoon. "Said he couldn't marry a woman with no dowry and mounting debts." Hunter's expression darkened. "Sounds like a man of poor character." "He was," Alina agreed. "Though at the time it felt like the end of the world. I had to sell everything just to pay the creditors, and even then, it wasn't enough. When Mrs. Browning's advertisement for help at her boarding house appeared in the Chicago paper, it seemed like providence." "So you came to Nebraska to escape your past," Hunter observed. "Just as I came to escape mine." Alina studied his face, noting how the bruises were fading, how much stronger he looked than just days before. "And have you escaped it?" Hunter's gaze turned distant. "I thought vengeance was the only way to honor Hannah's memory, to make things right. But now..." His eyes returned to hers, their blue depths warm with something that made Alina's breath catch. "Now I'm not so sure there isn't another path forward." Before Alina could respond, Mrs. Browning called from the back door. "Alina, Sheriff Morris is here to speak with Mr. Thornton." The moment broken, they made their way inside to find the sheriff waiting in the parlor. He was a tall man with a salt and pepper mustache and the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in the harsh prairie sun. "Mr. Thornton," he greeted Hunter with a firm handshake. "Good to see you on your feet. Deputy Wilson filled me in on what happened." "Sheriff," Hunter acknowledged, "any word on the Tanners?" "That's what I came to tell you," Morris said, his expression grim but satisfied. "We caught up with them yesterday, about 30 miles north of here. There was a shootout." Alina tensed, unconsciously moving closer to Hunter. "And 2 of them are dead, the youngest one and the one with the ginger beard. The leader, Scarface Tanner, is in custody, shot in the leg, but he'll live to hang." Hunter's shoulders sagged with what might have been relief, grief, or some complex mixture of both. "You're certain it was them?" Sheriff Morris nodded. "No doubt. Found wanted posters from 3 territories on them, along with items stolen from recent robberies." He paused, then added more gently, "And we found a locket with a woman's portrait inside. Deputy Wilson mentioned your sister." Hunter swallowed hard, his face pale. "Hannah, yes, she wore a silver locket with her husband's likeness inside." "I'd like you to come identify it when you're well enough," the sheriff said, "and to give your statement about what happened at their camp." "Of course," Hunter agreed. "And thank you, Sheriff, for bringing them to justice." After the sheriff left, Hunter stood motionless in the center of the parlor, his expression unreadable. Alina approached him cautiously. "Are you all right?" He looked at her as if coming back from somewhere distant. "I've been chasing them for so long," he said quietly. "Imagined confronting them, making them pay for what they did to Hannah, and now..." "Now it's over," Alina finished for him. "Justice has been served, even if not by your hand." Hunter nodded slowly. "It should feel more conclusive. But all I can think is that it won't bring her back." Alina took his hand, leading him to the sofa where they sat side by side. "No, it won't. Nothing can do that, but maybe now you can honor her memory in other ways." "How?" "By living," Alina said simply. "By being the good man she knew you to be." Hunter's hand tightened around hers. "When I rode into Nebraska City that day and saw you at the well, I was so focused on finding the Tanners that I almost rode past. but something made me stop. His voice roughened with emotion. I think maybe it was Hannah, guiding me to where I needed to be, not where I thought I was going. Eleanor's heart swelled at his words. I'm glad you stopped. So am I, Hunter said softly, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face. So am I. The days that followed brought a new rhythm to life at the boarding house. Hunter grew stronger, gradually taking short walks through town with Eleanor at his side. They became a familiar sight in Nebraska City, the tall cowboy and the slender young woman, often deep in conversation, or simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. Deputy Wilson returned Hannah's locket to Hunter after he had identified it, and Eleanor often found him sitting quietly in the garden, the silver oval open in his palm as he looked at his sister's face. I should write to Thomas, he said one evening as they sat beneath the apple tree. Tell him it's over. You know where to find him? Eleanor asked. Hunter shook his head. Not exactly. Last I heard, he was headed toward Wyoming territory, but I can send letters to the marshal's offices along the way. Someone will find him eventually. And what will you tell him? Hunter was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. That the Tanners have answered for their crimes. That Hannah can rest now. He turned to look at Eleanor. That I've found something I never expected to find. Eleanor's heartbeat quickened. And what is that? A future, Hunter said simply. A reason to stop looking backward and start looking ahead. The intensity in his gaze made Eleanor's breath catch. Hunter, I know it's soon, he acknowledged. Too soon, perhaps. But these past weeks have shown me what kind of woman you are, Eleanor. Brave, compassionate, stubborn in all the right ways. His mouth quirked into a smile. And I find myself thinking about building a life here in Nebraska City. A life that, if I'm very fortunate, might include you. Eleanor could scarcely believe what she was hearing. After William's rejection in Chicago, she had locked away the part of her heart that dreamed of love and family, focusing instead on survival, on independence. Yet here was Hunter Thornton, looking at her as if she were the only woman in the world, offering her a chance at everything she had once wanted. What are you saying exactly? She asked, needing to hear the words. Hunter took her hands in his. I'm saying that I care for you, Eleanor. More than I thought possible after losing so much. And while I can't offer you wealth or position, I can offer you my heart and my promise to cherish you always. Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as joy bloomed within her chest. I don't need wealth or position, she whispered. I just need you. Hunter's smile was radiant as he leaned forward to press his forehead against hers. Then you have me, for as long as you want me. That might be forever, she warned him, her own smile breaking through her tears. Forever sounds just about right, he murmured. And then, finally, his lips met hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. 2 weeks later, Eleanor stood nervously in Mrs. Browning's bedroom, the landlady fussing with the simple white dress they had worked together to create for this day. Something borrowed, Mrs. Browning said, carefully pinning a pearl brooch to Eleanor's bodice. This was my mother's. It's beautiful, Eleanor breathed, touching the lustrous pearls reverently. Thank you for everything, Mrs. Browning, for giving me a home when I needed one most. The older woman's eyes grew misty. You've brought life back to this house, Eleanor, and that cowboy of yours, well, he's a good man. I knew it the moment he rode up to rescue you at the well. A knock at the door interrupted them, and Dr. Miller's voice called, Ladies. Reverend Walsh is ready when you are. Eleanor took a deep breath, smoothing her hands over the white cotton of her wedding dress. It was simple, without the elaborate bustles and trimmings of Chicago fashion, but it was perfect for a bride in Nebraska City. Are you ready, dear, Mrs. Browning asked, adjusting Eleanor's wreath of wildflowers one last time. Eleanor nodded, her heart too full for words. 6 weeks ago, she had been alone in the world, cornered by outlaws at a well in a town where she barely knew a soul. Now she was about to marry a man who had ridden into her life like a hero from a storybook, but who had proven himself to be something far better, a real man, with real strength, real flaws, and real love to offer. The small parlor of the boarding house had been transformed for the occasion. Flowers adorned every surface, and the afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the gathered guests, the boarders, Dr. Miller and Sarah, Deputy Wilson, Sheriff Morris, and others from town who had become friends in the weeks since the dramatic events at the well. And there at the front, standing beside Reverend Walsh, was Hunter. He wore a new suit, purchased with the reward money the sheriff had insisted he take for his role in bringing down the Tanner gang. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face clean-shaven except for the short beard that Alina had admitted she rather liked. But it was his eyes that captured her, blue and bright with love as they followed her slow procession toward him. "Who gives this woman in marriage?" Reverend Walsh asked as Alina reached the makeshift altar. "I do," Mrs. Browning replied, her voice thick with emotion as she placed Alina's hand in Hunter's. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Hunter and Alina had written their own vows, simple promises to cherish and protect each other, to build a life of purpose and joy together, to face whatever challenges came their way as one. "I never expected to find you," Hunter said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "But now I can't imagine my life without you. You saved me, Alina, not just from death out on the prairie, but from a life consumed by vengeance. You gave me a reason to live again, to look forward instead of back." "You claimed me as yours before you even knew me," Alina replied, thinking of those first words at the well. "She's with me," you said, and in that moment, something in my heart recognized you, even though we were strangers. You've shown me what true courage is. Hunter, not just the bravery to face danger, but the courage to open your heart after loss, to choose love over hatred, life over vengeance." When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in cheers as Hunter drew Alina into a kiss that sealed their vows more eloquently than words ever could. The celebration that followed was joyous, with music from Mr. Jenkins's fiddle and more food than the small party could possibly consume, thanks to Mrs. Browning's enthusiastic preparations. As evening approached, Sheriff Morris raised a toast to the newlyweds. "To Hunter and Alina Thornton," he announced, glass held high. "May your lives together be as brave and true as the day you met at the well." Later, as the party continued around them, Hunter led Alina out to the garden where they had spent so many hours during his recovery. The setting sun cast long shadows across the grass, and the first stars were appearing in the eastern sky. "Happy, Mrs. Thornton?" Hunter asked, drawing her into his arms. "Completely," Alina assured him, still marveling at her new name. "Though I can scarcely believe how much has changed in such a short time." "Some things happen quickly but last forever," Hunter said, brushing a kiss across her forehead. "Like falling in love with a woman cornered by outlaws at a well." Alina smiled up at him. "Or falling in love with the cowboy who rode through and claimed her as his own." "I have something for you," Hunter said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in her palm. "A wedding gift." Alina opened the pouch carefully, gasping when a silver locket slid into her hand, not Hannah's, but a new one, its surface etched with delicate flowers. "It's beautiful." "Open it," Hunter encouraged. Inside, she found a tiny daguerreotype of Hunter on one side. The other side was empty. "For our future," Hunter explained, his voice soft. "For the family we'll build together." Tears of joy welled in Alina's eyes as she closed the locket and let Hunter fasten it around her neck. "I love you," she whispered, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," he replied, drawing her close once more. "My brave Alina, who faced down outlaws and risked herself to save a stranger." "Not a stranger," she corrected. The man I was always meant to find. As twilight deepened around them, Alina and Hunter returned to their wedding celebration, surrounded by friends who had become family in this small prairie town. The future stretched before them, a home of their own, children perhaps, years of building a life together in Nebraska City, or wherever their path might lead them. But whatever came next, they would face it together, their love forged in the crucible of danger and sacrifice, tempered by loss and healing, and ultimately stronger for all they had endured. A love that began with 3 simple words at a well on the edge of town. She's with me. Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the garden behind the small but sturdy house at the edge of Nebraska City. Alina Thornton looked up from her rose bushes to see her 3-year-old son, James, chasing butterflies while his father pretended to help, but was clearly more focused on encouraging the boy's delight than on actually catching anything. "Careful near the fence, Jamie," she called, resting a hand on her swollen belly as she straightened. The new baby, their second, was due in less than a month, and Alina found gardening increasingly uncomfortable, but was reluctant to give it up entirely. Hunter caught her eye across the yard and smiled, that same smile that still made her heart skip even after 5 years of marriage. He scooped James up and carried him piggyback style toward where Alina stood. "Mama, we almost caught one," James announced excitedly, his blue eyes so like his father's wide with enthusiasm. "It was yellow, impressive," Alina replied seriously. "Perhaps after lunch you can try again." "Speaking of lunch," Hunter said, setting James down gently, "Mrs. Jenkins just dropped by with a basket. Said it's to thank us for the furniture I finished for them yesterday." Alina smiled. Hunter's woodworking business had flourished in Nebraska City, his skillfully crafted furniture sought after by families throughout the county. The small workshop behind their house rarely sat idle, and Alina helped with the finer finishing work when she wasn't busy with James or her own small business selling preserves and baked goods. "How thoughtful of her," Alina said. "Jamie, go wash your hands for lunch, please." As their son raced toward the house, Hunter stepped closer to Alina, placing a gentle hand on her rounded abdomen. "How are you feeling today?" "Better than yesterday," she assured him. "Dr. Miller says everything is progressing normally." Hunter nodded, but Alina could see the worry in his eyes, the same worry that had been present throughout this pregnancy. Their first child's birth had been difficult, and though both Alina and James had emerged healthy, Hunter had been terrified by the hours of labor and Alina's exhaustion afterward. "Hunter," she said softly, covering his hand with hers, "we're going to be fine, all 3 of us." He managed a smile, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I know, I just can't help worrying about you." "That's because you've been watching over me since the day we met," Alina teased. "Some habits are hard to break." The mention of their first meeting brought a more genuine smile to Hunter's face. "Best decision I ever made, stopping at that well." "I should hope so," Alina laughed. "Otherwise you might never have known the joy of being knocked over by a 3-year-old every morning, or the privilege of building a cradle at midnight because your pregnant wife suddenly decides the old one isn't suitable." Hunter's laugh joined hers. "No regrets," he assured her, drawing her into his arms. "Not a single one." After lunch, while James napped and Hunter returned to his workshop to finish a rocking chair for their new baby, Alina sat at her desk to write in the journal she had kept since their wedding day. It was her gift to their children, a record of their family's beginning, of the love that had brought Hunter and Alina together and sustained them through the years. Today, she wrote about the letter they had received last week from Thomas, Hannah's widower. After years of wandering, he had finally found peace, remarrying and settling in Oregon Territory with his new wife. His words had brought tears to Hunter's eyes, not of grief this time, but of joy that Hannah's beloved husband had found happiness again, just as Hunter had. Eleanor's pen moved across the page, recording not just the events of their lives but the feelings that accompanied them, the deep contentment she found in their modest home, the pride she felt watching Hunter teach James to carve small animals from wood, the anticipation of welcoming their second child, the abiding love that continued to grow between them with each passing year. The sound of the front door opening interrupted her writing. Eleanor looked up to see Hunter standing in the doorway, wood shavings clinging to his shirt and a familiar intensity in his eyes. "What is it?" she asked, setting her pen aside. "I was just thinking," he said, crossing the room to kneel beside her chair, "about how different our lives might have been if I hadn't stopped that day at the well." Eleanor touched his cheek gently. "But you did stop." "Because something told me I needed to," Hunter said, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. "Call it fate or God's hand or just plain luck, but whatever it was, I thank it every day for leading me to you." "As do I," Eleanor whispered. "For my cowboy who rode through and claimed me as his when I needed him most." Hunter smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes crinkling in the way Eleanor had come to adore. "Always," he promised, just as he had promised at the well, at the altar, and countless times since. "You're with me, Eleanor, always." And as their lips met in a kiss as sweet and certain as their very first, Eleanor knew it was true. Whatever the future held, the imminent arrival of their second child, the years of watching James grow, the joys and challenges that life would inevitably bring, they would face it together. Their love a shelter and a strength, born in a moment of danger but built to last a lifetime. In the small but thriving town of Nebraska City, Nebraska, their story had become something of a legend, the tale of the brave young woman cornered by outlaws at the town well, and the mysterious cowboy who rode through just in time, claiming her with 3 simple words that would change both their lives forever. But for Hunter and Eleanor Thornton, it wasn't legend. It was simply their beginning, the first chapter in a love story that continued to unfold with each passing day, written not in grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but in the quiet, steadfast devotion of 2 hearts that had recognized each other instantly, even when they were strangers. And in that recognition, they had found not just love, but home.